Hey everybody, welcome back to the quest for the Bestest 2021 Best Picture nominees. We are talking about every Best Picture nominee. We're going to figure out what we like the best, what goes at our number one spot, and then we're going to talk about what the Academy thinks is number one. And then, to tie it all up in a nice bow, we're going to talk about it in conjunction with the rest of our list and figure out where 2021 ranks up against years such as 1947, 1963. You know, how does this year stack against some of the best? So today we're talking about The Father, directed by Florian Zeller. It's starring the main role, Anthony Hopkins. We got Olivia Colman and some other people, but those are our real main characters in this film. Pretty short movie. We've had some maybe back and forth on the sidelines about what we thought, but I really want to hear our thoughts. And to start off, give me what I should be thinking about, I would like to hear Tucker's perspective to begin.
Well, I'm actually going to start off with something other than my perspective, which is I'm just going to list the nominations that it's gotten so we can set our perspective in the proper way. With something fascinating that I learned about 10 seconds before we started recording. I was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Supporting Actress for Olivia Colman, Adapted Screenplay because I believe this was a play beforehand, Production Design, and Best Film Editing. Oh, wait. Shit. The guy's name is Yorgos Lanthimos, which looks a lot like Yorgos Lanthimos. And I thought that it was edited by Yorgos Lanthimos, and I was going to freak out about that, but it's not true.
Nope.
Well, there goes my bit. I misread it, and I was like, whoa! That's scarily close to Lanthimos.
I remember seeing that because I was really lucky. I got to go see this in the theater, socially distanced and masked, of course. And surprisingly far cheaper than watching it at home, having to rent it for $20 or whatever. But I saw that credit in the beginning, and I was like, "Oh, that's really close to Yorgos Lanthimos."
Yeah. Okay, well, honestly, if I am to give my perspective on this, I watched this about a week ago, and for the first time in this history of this show, I did not take notes on a film because I thought I was going to be seeing it again with Tanner, but he saw it without me. So this is going to be the weirdest discussion that I've ever done. But I think this movie is absolutely fantastic from essentially every perspective. And I enjoyed it way, 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 way more than I expected to.
There you go. Tanner, since you saw it without Tucker, leaving him forlorn and at home alone, how was your experience watching it?
My experience was much better sans Tucker, obviously. But no, I honestly expected. We don't say this, but we shouldn't really need to. But spoilers for this, by the way, I feel like this is a spoilerful movie because this is what my opening statement hinges on. I thought this is just going to be like a really slow burn drama, and it's a very actored, and it's just kind of got nothing special outside of like some really solid performances. But no, this thing opens immediately with a very high concept sort of conceit for how it's put together, how the scenes are connected from one end to the next, what actors come in at what points, and that is, of course, that this entire thing is framed through the perspective of Anthony, portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, who's suffering from dementia or some sort of mentally deteriorating disease. And by putting it in his perspective, the audience just has no clue what's real, what's fake, what events happen in what order, where we are, who we're talking to really, and who we are, who am I? But the way that this film frames all of those questions and wraps this up into an entirely new experience that I had no idea we were going into it, I was really blown away by it. I loved it.
Yeah, I thought this film was truly fascinating. The narration, we've talked about, in some of our other Quest videos about films that have been adapted from plays. And that is a tricky thing to do because the play takes place in one location, often doesn't have a whole lot going on besides the acting and maybe some sound work. But this film takes its abilities as a film to portray this stuff that is pretty hard to portray otherwise and does it really well. I think it's extremely interesting, and it's, we get down to it, it's terrifying. It's a horrifying movie to watch, and as you understand how it's telling you this story, then it gets in your head, and I'm like, oh wait, what's going on? I'm trying to figure it out, but I mean, truly, it's so confusing that you can't. And every 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say that's a bad thing. I do want to be able to figure out what's going on in the movie, but because this is such a specific topic, I think it's necessary, and it makes for a enjoyable and thought-provoking experience. Now, I deliberately skipped over you, Abram. I know you have some different thoughts, so I just wanted to keep all of our pluses and our minuses lumped together. So I want to hear what you've got to say, because I know it's pretty different.
I did not like The Father almost at all. I think that this is a very interesting film, but we've talked in other reviews about gimmick films, and we've talked about Oscar bait, and for me, this is pretty archetypical of that. I think that The Father would have worked incredibly well as a plot line or as a short film, but the way I read it is that it was a fascinating depiction of someone's deteriorating mental health, but it's vapid. I don't think that the characters surrounding Anthony Hopkins do anything of substance. I think the film is entirely hinged in its appeal on how disorienting it is, which it is successfully. And I think Anthony Hopkins is here in acting to be here and to act and to get a nomination for Best Actor, because his performance is emotional, but I think at a lot of times it feels overwrought. I really think that it's inventive in some respects, but on the whole, I found it really off-putting in how narcissistic it felt, and how I really didn't see anything to grab onto when you can pretty quickly recognize, okay, yeah, we're not in this flat. These people aren't who they say they are. It's a really interesting lens into dementia, I think, but for such a heavy topic, such a complex topic, I think this is a really simple way to approach it, which is stylistically interesting, but not interesting from a substance perspective almost at all.
I think the one thing I was going into this movie thinking is that, okay, honestly, I was on about the same page as Tanner. I thought this was going to be more of just other people taking care of him and him kind of being wacky and going down the tube in terms of his mental sanity. But the fact is that this is a film, from my perspective, having not seen every movie, but I've seen quite a few movies, that this is it's not a film like anything else I've seen. It is not only an unreliable narrator, but an unreliable film. There is nothing in this film to grab onto, and I think that is clearly quite intentional. And I think the structure of it, because nothing is reliable, makes that very interesting. You say that it was maybe to you clear that this was not happening in the flat, and I don't think it's actually as clear as maybe you're saying, is because the film takes place over an indiscriminate amount of time. In my mind, this is being told through his memories and his misperception of things. So is it in his flat? Maybe you think so at the beginning, because why wouldn't it be that, that's a reasonable place for it to take place? But then, okay, well, he's confusing his flat with his daughter's flat. And you're like, okay, well, that's still pretty reasonable. But then there's another spin on it. It's like, no, her husband owns it. But is her husband even real? Did they get divorced? There's so many layers to this, and the way that they tie everything together end to end and subvert your expectations, and not only replace actors and moments in the scenes, but they change the set in subtle ways that makes you disoriented and confused on which room you're in or which door goes where. And when it comes around to the end and you realize, okay, he actually has been dreaming all this, quote unquote, by replacing the reality of being in a mental hospital, or like an old folks home, essentially. It ties it together in a really sad way, because you're realizing that this man who clearly had a lot of energy in the past and what had a drive to get things done has just been, everything we've seen as just his sad memories, and we're watching them be lost. And I think that the fact that the movie is so successful in its unique structuring makes that all the more powerful. When the end, he's just staring out the window, you're like, wow, holy shit, this is really sad. And I had a grandpa who had Alzheimer's, and I watched him go downhill every time I would see him every year. He would be telling these long stories and didn't remember our names properly, and would just say random things and do random actions, when he felt like it, because he was losing his mind. And I think this is a very good visual representation of that. And I think there's a lot of substance to dig into, because it is so thematically rich. It is so rich in character and history, and the fact that you can puzzle it all together is just absolutely fascinating.
I think that you said something about it, you questioning its validity as a feature film, and I think that well, maybe if it can be rewritten to be a short film, but in its the way it's presented as an hour and a half long movie, it's one of the shortest movies I've seen in a long while,
Yeah.
actually. Which no question, no qualms or anything about that. But um, the way that it continually makes you re-question, you think you figured it out, and as soon as you think you've got it, nope, you got it wrong. It adds another fold, it adds another character, it adds another twist to the story. Maybe it replays scenes. Scenes are replayed a couple times. They don't,
Oh,
you
so
know,
cool.
not everything takes place linearly. The plot is totally jumbled as in the narration, and so to keep that going, I think it works really well, and it makes it a feature film, and it compels me the whole time, even at points where I don't, I don't like his character. I hate how he acts most of the time. And so as I was saying, I think it like works. It works specifically as a feature film with all these new folds that it's adding, and as it keeps introducing characters, pulls them back, retells scenes, all that just like it confuses the hell out of me, and it makes me, as it progresses more and more, it turns Anthony into a much more sympathetic character, even in his crotchety old manness. Makes me initially dislike him.
Yeah.
It's the Daniel Craig Knives Out meme. It makes no damn sense. It compels me though.
I agree. I agree with everything that Timo and Tucker have been saying. One thing that's really interesting about this film to me is that both of them brought up, that you're trying to puzzle it together. You're trying to figure out what pieces actually happened, where they slot in the overall timeline. And I was trying to do that same thing, which is probably what contributed to probably our overall or all of our liking of the film so much. But towards the end, I think it's about the time that we actually see Anthony in the retirement home. I came to realize, like, oh, we're not supposed to do that in this film. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but like, there's certainly a reading of this film where you can do that, and one where you don't. And I think that's a really interesting way to make a film. Is that like, this is not in like a thriller that you're supposed to puzzle it together what actually happened, r/the father fan theories going on. But no, this is an experience. This is Florian Zeller like, okay, I'm going to stylistically tell and try to make the audience understand what living in the latter days with one of these conditions is like. And I think that he accomplishes that incredibly stylistically in an incredibly engaging and enthralling manner. And I think that the performances put on by Anthony Hopkins is incredible. The performance from Olivia Colman, although we don't see her very much, really brings true in a completely different aspect of the film, which is in a child having gone through adulthood, now having to see their parent who raised them go through this, and having that dynamic switch and having to deal with this, and maybe having your partner say like, we can't live like this. I know he's your father. I know he's the father, but we cannot go on. We cannot go on with him living in our home like this. And they
Who's the father?
They show some elder abuse in this. It's all very it's very engaging, and it puts it all out there, but it's restrained at the perfect times as well. And I think this is near perfect.
I think where I differ, because I hear what all of you guys are saying, but I don't think it accomplishes, for me, tonally what it's trying to accomplish. I think it's a very showy film, and I don't think that that's what this subject matter deserves. I think the use of the score, the sort of realization that things are happening out of order, it played in the way I was watching the film as you didn't see this coming, you didn't see that coming. I think that the film gets so lost in how admittedly very clever its editing is and how clever its structure is, that it begins to dilute and get away from what this film should be. And I think the strongest moments are when Anthony Hopkins is playing either off of his daughter and Laura, when he's going on that whole rant about how you're not gonna take the fucking flat or whatever he says, or when he's going off of the nurse. These are really vulnerable and emotional moments, but I think so much of the film for me is, oh, here, look at this. Look at the way that we're stitching these things together to break continuity, to mess with the audience's head, and interesting and it's effective to an extent, but I think it becomes so much about that style that it became a gimmick to me, and I didn't feel the emotional resonance that they were trying to convey through it.
I think what you're saying really hinges on to what degree you empathize with Anthony. Because yeah, you're right. He does have these very vulnerable moments. But I think what you're supposed to feel in the rest of the film, what you think is a little narcissistic, a little showy, which I can see those criticisms. I think that empathy really hinges on you feeling that same confusion and fear that Anthony feels in those moments. And he doesn't show it, but you can see it in the dialogue that he uses. Because when something happens that he doesn't remember or doesn't understand, he's like, "Oh yes, of course, of course I remember that." Which is what people do in those situations. Which is it's incredibly realistic, his dialogue and his performance in this. And I think, but you're still supposed to pick up on and empathize with those moments of confusion and of fear, because overall, I think the emotion that we're supposed to get from Anthony in this is fear. He's afraid of change. He's afraid of what's happening to him. He's afraid of what's going to happen to the people around him, of losing people, of losing himself, losing his own mind, his memories, time overall, which is what the watch represents, which is really clever. And I think, yeah, like I said, I think it's all handled very, very well.
I think. Okay, Abram, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Timo, but I see where you're coming from, and I do feel that. I feel that especially when the film slows down, even just for a scene to let these things play out, which I would have wanted to see more of. But I think part of my problem is that it becomes harder for me as an audience member to want to empathize with that fear when literally paying attention to these events and trying to parse them out doesn't matter when the overall narrative is about being inside of his head and the feeling opposed to what's happening. If there was an urgency to understand what Anne was doing, to understand who Paul was, to understand what they're going to do to Anthony, I think there would have been a little bit more reason for the structural obfuscation of the plot and of his understanding of the world to operate the way that it does. But because it doesn't, I found myself disconnected from the fact that, okay, we're just kind of unspooling time and respooling it in ways that are supposed to be disorienting, and they are, but ultimately, if I don't need to try to cut through the disorientation, then it feels like a showpiece. It feels like, okay, you know what, whatever, here, these events are being shown out of order. Actually, I think personally, I might have been more compelled by the French play that this is based off of, in terms of understanding the characters, in terms of making it a little bit more about trying to hold on to something, because I don't see as an audience member why I should be holding on to these events when ultimately it becomes clear, okay, we're not where we say we are. Ultimately, Anne's motivations don't really amount to much. Ultimately, it is about Anthony, but we're just focusing on, okay, this is happening. It's happening again. We're changing. We're shifting. It's clever. I think the movie is clever, but I don't necessarily think that clever should have been what you're shooting for in a film that's trying to get inside the head of a man with dementia, especially when the film tries to set up this complex web around him. I think if there's a little bit more energy put beyond the style to drive the substance home further, because it is there in some portions, the film would have been stronger.
Yeah, I am.
What were you gonna say?
I think that you've got some of it, but for me, as watching the film, I couldn't not try to piece it together. Like, my brain is just wired, I guess, in that way, where even as thinking brain understands that this film is not, I'm not going to be able to piece it together, and that's the point as far as I saw it. But I still tried. I still like, oh, but wait, were we in the nursing home the whole time? And there's, I think there's a lot of visual metaphors. Tanner brought up the watch. There's like the color blue is really prominently portrayed through the film, and that production design nomination is absolutely deserving. But even when I'm like, I'm stumped, I can't figure it out, I just like, well, I still keep trying. And that's where I think the fear and the just like the total lack of understanding, which is the central thematic idea for me, really comes through and hits at least how I view it.
I think you actually hit the nail on the head there, Timo. I think that the film, and this is the film that is a lot less about plot than it is about the feel, the characters, their emotions, and how that affects the world around them and how they perceive things. This movie is not about the end goal of figuring it out. It's about the act of trying to figure it out. It's him trying his best to keep his memories intact and being frustrated when someone else doesn't accept him for what he's trying to do, or belittles him, or as something slips away, you feel that anger towards him trying to keep it all together. And the film is structured around the fact that he doesn't necessarily remember things clearly. He can't even remember what his own child looks like, and he doesn't exactly remember these certain memories, but he remembers some better than others, and he keeps bringing up certain stories, and he remembers. I think the film works best when you are reconnecting the small aspects together, when it's his chair, when it's his watch, when it's the chicken they're having for dinner, that keep getting replayed in interesting ways that play into the characters and the way they deliver it, and the way that informs the relationships to the rest of the scene. You're always trying to piece things together, but it's not possible. I think the truth is in there somewhere. I think there is a way you can dig through this film and find what actually happened, who he was, who his children were, what their relationships were, which Paul is real, which if they are actually just reinterpretations of the people that are taking care of him, or if those are separate people. And I think there is a reality here. And the fact that it is so confusing and it is more about the act of trying than the final goal, I think is what makes this film unique, and is why I'm honestly surprised. Well, Abram said this feels like Oscar bait. I'm surprised this got nominated for Best Picture. I'm surprised it's receiving the accolade it got, because to me, it feels like the opposite of that. It feels like, okay, we're subverting your expectations of what an Oscar bait film is. Of course, you've got Anthony Hopkins delivering an absolutely fantastic performance with lots of subtle nuance in his movements and his emotions and his reactions to things. But we're not just giving you that. We're giving you something that is more about being in the moment, more about emotion, more about memory than it is when you're watching a film. And you have to pay more attention when watching this than you do your average Oscar bait film, which, is just, a flowery story that's told to you verbatim, and you don't really have to put much thought into it. But this film really surprised me, because it doesn't feel like anything else we've seen so far. And I'm very happy it's receiving the accolades. I think all the nominations that it gotten are far and beyond just deserved. I think all the performances are fantastic. I really liked Imogen Poots trying to, as Laura, trying to put on a show face to take care of someone, but when she has this underlying layer of fear of not being able to do it, or if she has to react in a certain way to something, how does she handle the situation? There's such a balance here. But I know I'm going on a long tangent. I'm trying to get all my points out right now. But I don't know. I just think this film is endlessly fascinating, and it feels to me the exact opposite of what an Oscar bait film is, in my mind canon.
Mhm.
You mentioned it demanding or requiring your attention, and I was going to note that I think that you have to pay attention, but the film makes it easy to pay attention, but also necessary. I think the film does filmmaking tricks that it's always grabbing you and pulling you back in. I talked about production design, and here I'm going to really lay into it. The set's always changing. The set is never the same scene to scene.
Yes, that was the moment that really, when I noticed that sets were the same layouts, but the furniture was different and the colors were different, and you're like, holy shit, that's what really hooked me.
And so that is oh wait, I have a clue. I'm going to start trying to figure stuff out. But then as the scene plays out and I get wrapped back into the drama, and then we go back into the what's changed of the scene. And then I really love the scene-to-scene cutting. The way the editor, Yorgos Lanthimos 2, wants to cut between one shot to the next, where they're sort of match cuts, but they're not. And that just works really well as a disorienting tool, but it still makes me pay attention, because it's a movie from a play, and a movie from a play often isn't that interesting. I mean, I often am bored. You take 5 movies from plays and 5 movies original or from a book or whatever, and I feel like I'm going to be disinterested, a little bit more bored, more from the play as a source material. But this uses everything that you can do in a film so effectively to tell the story that I think probably was told very well in the play as well, but it expands upon that in this visual time medium that film does so well. It's a good example of your distinction between film versus theater.
Yeah.
I think, speaking of distinctions, some of it comes from what I think that a film with the subject matter should be, and what this wasn't. So a lot of my dislike of the film is subjective, because when you talk about the production design, when you talk about the editing, when you talk about these things, that's all true. There's a lot of objective merit to the film. But I think that the way we talk about this is highlighting to me part of my issue is that this becomes a technical endeavor. It becomes a technical marvel. This is a technically incredibly interestingly constructed film. Reminds me in some ways of speaking about a 1917 or some of the other really little g gimmick films that happen where the gimmick is being used to propagate a thematic element or a narrative element.
Yeah.
But I just think that the message of the film for me became, okay, this is clever. We keep talking about cleverness. We keep talking about interesting filmmaking, about subversion and everything. But this is a film where I really wanted a lot of emotion. And I think that all of this gets in the way of that, because when the film takes its time, it hits the hardest. I don't think it does that enough. When you get to sequences where you have Anne and Anthony and Laura, when you slow down and you're in the room at the end of the film, when we're taking time, when we just see a shot of the other daughter after a car accident or insert X accident, whatever happened. I think when the film is a little bit slower, a little bit more subtle, and a little bit more about its characters and about that emotion, it hits more what it's trying to do. And I think you can have both. And Tucker was speaking about balance, and I think in through the lens he was talking about balance, he's right. But through the lens I wanted of the stylistic success of the technical element, but also the character element, the heart of the film, it just didn't work for me. I don't think that it keeps both of these ideas in concert. All of this technical achievement and the heart. I think the film sacrifices one for the other and flips between that, because you get great sequences of both. But I didn't get a harmony of the two. And for me, that was a big disappointment, especially when this is such a personal issue to so many people and it's touched so many lives, and you get so many films that are this honest. It's a very honest film. For everything that it is, it's very honest, but I don't think it got out of its own way enough. Because the production design is incredible, but this is not the type of film where I want to sit down and be thinking, okay, they changed the props, they changed the mise en scène to evoke this and to confuse the audience, because ultimately now you're distancing me from Anthony, you're distancing me from the people here who are watching their father fall apart in front of them. I think the film strikes at a lot, but I don't think it really connected for me.
I think I might sound like a broken record here, but I think it does again tie back to the idea of empathizing with Anthony, because this at the same time that you're experiencing the changing layout of the apartment and the changing people coming in and out, so is Anthony. And I think what Zeller wants you to do is empathize with him and sort of get on his wavelength of being fearful of what's happening and be confused by what's happening. And that is the core of the characterization of Anthony, is his that's the core of it. And surrounding that is things like his irritation, his anger, which is inspired by his fear, obviously, his irritability, and his stubbornness is a really interesting thing, because obviously everyone's experience with a family member having Alzheimer's or dementia is going to be different. But I've been looking through some reviews, and it sounds like some people can empathize with these people being stubborn, especially someone who was born around the 1940s. They grew up in some harsher environments, and they don't want this help. They don't want help from their child who they raised in the first place. And I think that comes across in Anthony Hopkins's performance as well. I just want to commend Anthony Hopkins on this as well. He started acting back in the 60s. He's 83 right now, and he's still so malleable and flexible to this style of filmmaking. And I think it's incredible.
I think you're right in the fact that maybe from the perspective Abram was watching it, wanting that to slow down a little more, would have given you a little bit of more time to connect to the characters. But I think Tanner is correct in seeing that this film is not intended for you to watch the characters interact. It's intended for you to feel the characters' emotions through their eyes. The reason that it's intercutting so quickly, the reason that the sets are changing, the reason that you're noticing the mise en scène changing is because, as Tanner said, he is as well. And when you're noticing those things, you have to go through those emotions of, okay, well, is this the same place? Yeah, I noticed that they changed it. I noticed that they did the editing, but he's mixing his memories up. This is what through his eyes he's seeing. And I think that's why this is the perfect way to tell this story. I really don't think you can do it in a more flat way with just watching the characters interact, because I think that takes away from the emotional power that the film as a medium holds. Because I have not been in a film like this before, watching a film like this, where my emotions are so tied to the filmmaking. I often disregard set design, costume design, cinematography, all that. I'm like, okay, I want to focus on the story. I want to focus on the characters. But this uses filmmaking in all of its editing and cinematography and set design glory to enhance its characters, to enhance its themes of all the things that the characters are having, those conflicts. The filmmaking supports those, and without the filmmaking being as complex and as interesting, as unique as it is, I think it loses the charm of what makes this movie so special. And it would end up feeling much more like, okay, yeah, this is just another Oscar bait film, right? Someone's losing their mind, and we want to see the emotion behind that. But the fact that they went so far to improve the filmmaking to support that makes this film so much more special.
Yeah,
I think it's important.
Sorry.
I think it's
Timo,
important to note.
I just want to drop in one quick point here on top of that. I'm sorry. But yeah, to go off of because Tucker reminded me of this when he was talking. And it relates to Abrams' sort of criticism that he wants to spend more time in those character moments, because in talking about empathizing with Anthony, so does he. Towards the end of the film, in those vulnerable moments, he's like, no, please stay with me. I don't want you to leave this room. I can't be alone. I can't be in here, because every time he's alone, something changes. And he is also striving for those brief moments where things slow down for him in his mind. And people are like, oh no, I'll be right back. But he's like, no, I know if these people leave, if I leave this moment with them, things are going to speed up again and change. And that just reminded me of that. So I think it is much more of an experience of you living with Anthony's condition.
Yeah, I was going to say,
losing those fleeting moments of stillness.
Mm-hmm.
He can't have them anymore because his mind's so messed up.
I was going to say it's critical in understanding this film to really latch onto it's from his perspective. It's not from his daughter's perspective. It's not from the caregiver's perspective. It's really, you see the world, you see the characters through Anthony's eyes. And I think that because it's through his eyes, and, in thinking about it, well, what if they told it from a little bit more pulled back perspective, maybe with still some of the elements that convey memory through visual means. I don't think it would succeed as much due to, just it loses the viscerality of it. You lose some of that real core stuff that just punches you in the gut as you realize how much it's deteriorating, for him, because you see it deteriorating on the screen. The perspective and the narration of the film being very clearly from Anthony's perspective is really important to understanding like how it functions and where to come at it from a critique perspective.
I think you guys are making a lot of good points, and I think you're right on the whole. I'm not sure my position is moved a lot, but I think I have a different appreciation for where you guys are coming from. I think that you can find, just from my perspective, I think you can find a medium between a very typical drama and the way this is shown. I still think you could work from his perspective, but just slow down scenes a little bit, maybe change the ways that musical cues are used as like hey, look at the way the time is shifting. I just think that there are things that could be done to not, in my opinion, foreground the style in a way that takes away from the emotion. That said, there are things I really like about the film, and just to move forward a little bit, I think it's a really interestingly shot film. One shot I really loved is you see Anne in the kitchen, and the middle third of the frame is her moving back and forth, and the two sides of the kitchen door are out of focus. I think this film is shot in very interesting ways that adds a lot to the feel. It's a very stylistic film from a cinematography perspective as well. So I really did like that. Like Tucker was saying and Tanner was saying, the performances are really great. I think that my only issues with them come from, again, the way that the filmmaking kind of portrays them in ways that I didn't connect with. But I think that everybody is excellent in the film with what they do. I think there's a lot to really like. I just think that my reading of the film is different, but I think the cinematography is worth commending. A lot of the film, the script is very good too. There's a lot of, we keep talking about fundamental elements. There's a lot of great fundamental elements to the film.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that one scene that Tanner and I had a little bit of conversation about, which I think is one of the highlights of the film that hooked me even deeper is the scene where they have dinner in the dining room, and Anthony Hopkins comes by the door and catches them, Anna and Paul having a conversation, and they go through their entire dinner, an edited dinner, an edited down dinner of them having their meal and cutting between conversations, and then he gets up and leaves, and the scene resets to the same positions that they were at the beginning, and it loops back around in a completely seamless manner. And I think that it's that loop of him leaving, losing the connection to whatever was going on in the moment, and then old man wandering back into the room and back to square one. And I think the fact that it is no cut between that shot of going there and coming back is just it's incredible filmmaking that I mean, Tanner and I had like a whole discussion about, that was so cool, because I think the fact that it is so cool is, maybe not a great thing when I'm thinking about the filmmaking rather than the emotions, but it's still a film. And I want a film to do those clever, unique things with its medium that make me think, oh yeah, this is something special. They put a lot of effort into this. And I would rather have that and something else to grab onto than have it be a little more flat. I don't know. I just wanted to bring up that scene because I think it's a really special filmmaking moment.
Something I want to add off of that is
while you're talking, I'm going to interject that I am very curious to see where this lines up on the vote machine. So Tanner, give us your thoughts and submit your votes, and we'll find out in a second.
Okay. I wanted to say just a quick note off of that, because yes, it does. It recurs naturally. It loops back around again naturally, but it also serves the larger story in it sets up Paul's abusive behavior towards Anthony. Because I believe that is the first time that we see him actively, aggressive in a physical manner towards him.
I think that Paul might have done a little bit of that earlier when they were standing in the when the first time you're introduced to him, he gets up from reading a newspaper and starts to berate Anthony. I think it's one of the best moments of Anthony Hopkins' performance when he's reacting to this guy, like giving a bunch of crap, and he can't like keep up, so he's overwhelmed and his hands are shaking, and you see him like flinching away from something that probably back in the day he would have been able to stand up for himself and knock down the conversation. No, I'm the patriarch here, I know what I'm about. But this man has deteriorated so much that he's taken back to being a child and reacting to someone yelling at him for something that on the whole is not his fault.
Speaking of him, sort of reverting back to that childlike sort of fear, two things that I didn't really like, because I did say it's a near perfect film. I don't really care for that sort of final, the sort of final scene where he reverts back that and he wants his mommy. I understand that that's probably pretty realistic, but it felt a little too on the nose for the script from a script writing perspective, as well as, and this speaks to some of Abrams' criticisms in terms of character fleshing out. I think more Lucy stuff wouldn't have hurt this film at all, because we see him have a sort of nightmare about her after her accident, and making some hints about her being a painter. And there's obviously some sort of relationship that there's some tension between their relationship when Anne and Lucy and Anthony were younger, when they were children. But I more of that would not have hurt the film in any way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've talked at length about our various points or various perspectives. So are you ready to hear where it lands?
Oh boy. Oh God.
So
I'm nervous.
The number is 2.25. Quarter.
Okay.
So
And
Tanner and I put it at number 2. Tucker had it at number 1, and Abram put it at number 4. So
there we go.
Thoughts on that placement?
That means remind me again, because I'm always bad at math, and I'm sure some members of our audience are as well. No offense, math is tough. Don't get me wrong.
2.25 would mean that it goes at place number 3. So it would go one spot above Minari, and it would go one spot below Judas and the Black Messiah.
I'd say I'm okay with that. I mean, I think we've fleshed out all of our perspectives and takes on this film as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly still think that
I'm real on the fence if it's better or not than Judas.
Yeah.
And given that Abram didn't like it very much, I think we can respect that in the final placement of the vote.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I think for me, I just have to say the reason I want to put it at number 1 is I honestly think that this does the Sound of Metal thing of putting you through a deteriorating experience a lot better, because I think the filmmaking, while the sound design, of course, obviously a lot better, a lot more interesting in Sound of Metal, I think that this uses the filmmaking technique so much stronger to put you into the mind of a character. And not only that, because those two are two of my favorite. Those are my 2 favorites so far. I mean, they're very close in my mind. But I think that this, from my perspective, should be above Judas and the Black Messiah, because while that tells a more impactful historical story, I think this tells a more personalized emotional story to a character. And obviously this is fictionalized, but I think this is much more unique of a film. That film you can watch through the lens of, oh yeah, this is just another biopic for the Oscars season. But I think that this does something so much more unique that I want to give it that bump above, because we're always talking about feeling sameness and stuff. And while I really love Judas and the Black Messiah, it's a 9 out of 10, it has that element where you can say, oh yeah, this is just another one of. And you can't do that with The Father. There's nothing like this, as I said. And I've seen 1,600 films, by the way. I just passed that on Letterboxd last night. So I think that unique element just gives it that slight edge over something that is as amazing as Judas and the Black Messiah. But I gotta say, I wish it was up 1.
To toss my hat in the ring here, I think that, first of all, putting it above Minari, I'm fine with. That doesn't really bother me. But I think that for me, we spent a lot of the discussion saying that it was cool and clever, and I don't think that's what I should have been feeling, having finished this film and knowing that the emotional palette it was going for. For me, there's a disjunction between the filmmaking and what it's trying to evoke, and that's very subjective. But I think for me, Judas is so exacting in what it's trying to accomplish, and its performances are so strong that everybody is going to watch it and get out of it what the filmmaker intended, and they're going to get a very powerful and important narrative. Now, I know that I am in the very small minority on The Father. I looked online. I didn't realize that this film was as acclaimed as it is. So maybe I'm speaking from a minority opinion, and so that's not representative of the whole. But I think that Judas and the Black Messiah is a more precise film than this.
Okay. Well, I think it certainly reflects the placement. Certainly reflects the overall consensus of the group. So I can't justify putting it over Sound of Metal just because I'm going to push back on Tucker's statement. I think that you could definitely find something that does something similar to this. Whereas I think that Sound of Metal's sound design is incredibly inventive. And as well as, doing the same thing as this, which is tying that struggle, that stylistic filmmaking element into the emotional resonance of the character journey as well.
I think it's funny to think about how similar the movies really are.
Yeah,
they're not wholly too different from each other. But it sounds like we've reached a consensus. We'll put it at number 3, 3 out of 4. So the list as it stands right now is Sound of Metal, Judas and the Black Messiah, The Father, this addition. And then at the bottom, Minari. That was a poor choice of words right there to make it clear and understandable, but that's okay. And now I think it's time to ask Schedule Master Mr. Dykstra what we're going to be talking about next.
Well, speaking of Abrams' criticisms of this being an Oscar bait film, the next one we're watching is perhaps the Oscar baitiest, and that is, of course, Mr. David Fincher's Mank, starring Gary Oldman, Amanda Seyfried, Charles Dance, Bill Nye the Science Guy.
10 nominations for this film, I believe. The most nominations of any of the nominees.
A lot of technical nominations for this film.
But yes, ballot.
the number one most nominated of this Oscar season. So, we'll be coming back. We'll be coming back to review that next. It's in black and white, so a little bit more throwback, a little bit quirky. David Fincher.
There
Yeah.
we go. I'm excited. I really haven't seen a Netflix movie since I watched.
Oh yeah.
I went and saw The Irishman in theaters over a year ago. That was the last like Netflix original movie that I've seen. So I got to see if they're keeping up with the
Yeah.
with this. I don't want to say that they're keeping up the great, because Irishman was a interesting movie. Was it a great movie? I don't know. But
Netflix has 2 nominees this year. We still
Netflix.
have the second one.
For the next few at least, our best friend and confidant Abram Buner won't have to be dropping $20 per movie on these now, because
my,
these are
I really do feel
Yes.
bad for Abram for watching The Father for $20 and then not.
I really
liking
feel
it.
bad for him having the moral qualms that he has in his own life.
Yeah.
Well, that was
Yes.
that was a great discussion. Really interesting points all around. Glad we had it. Glad we're here to talk about it. Glad I watched this movie. And you know, I'm gonna toot my own horn. Glad I saw it in theaters. I can't wait to go and see more movies in theaters once it's like really truly safe. So until then, keep it here for backlog banter content. We got the YouTube, we got the Twitter. Check out our Letterboxd page. The list is getting updated as we talk about the nominees and as we will move back into the regular quest discussion. It's been a good time. We'll catch you next time to talk about Ol Fincher's Mank. All right.
Oh yeah.
Peace.